Who's your favorite character? I have my favorite character. I'm going to leave it for after, but writing the characters and stuff like that. Who was your favorite character and why?
My favorite was Gus.
Hmm.
And, he was the one, remember the long rambling conversations where nothing ever seemed to, where it seemed to never get around to business. And yet he always had business coming in, right? And always was the guy who kind of set people up with each other. And so,
Right.
that's kind of my strength. And that's, something I'm comfortable with. So I probably took to Gus more than anything.
Wow.
Nice. I love it. Baruch, who's your favorite? I'm just curious. My wife and I play this game all the time, so Baruch. Go.
I'm really horrible with names, so you'll forgive me. But it's funny because as I was reading the book, and every time I read it over, I always connect with different individuals. So when I read the book the first time, I was like, "Oh, I'm Joe. I'm totally Joe." And then I'm like, "Oh, but I want to be a Pindar." But then at one point, after I started really implementing the principles that teaches the laws of stratospheric success, and this may be who you're referring to, the connector. Is that Gus? Gus. So it got to a point where, and I was going to networking events, and they're like, "Oh, so what do you do?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm a connector. I just and I say I read this amazing book called The Go-Giver." So I can't say I have any one favorite, although I think the unsung hero of the whole thing, and I love that you tied it in a later book, was Rachel with Rachel's Coffee. I think that is by far nothing is ever successful without good coffee. So I'm glad you put that in there.
Yeah. So my wife and I have a lot of dinners discussion about this, and so she believes that I play a huge role similar to Gus. That's what I do a lot. I I know somebody that I know somebody and stuff like that. Although I really related to Pindar, simply because, and my wife says, "Oh, you always go to the top," but that's a joke. But for me, Pindar was so important because throughout the book, he actually speaks the least. He allows Joe to go through his own journey in his own way, and he kind of guides him. He gives him little, nudges here and there. But I really appreciated how, even though Pindar is this kind of guru in the story, but he really lets Joe to figure it out on his own. And that's something I strive to be. I try to learn from that. I try to grow that way. My wife also agrees. She very much relates to Rachel as well. So she loves that whole behind the scenes, and she plays such a big role, So she loves her as well. And that was really big for me. So for me, Pindar is my hero in the story.
And I think we've all been Joe. I think we can all relate to Joe. And Joe or Josephine, right? Everybody's been there. The person who's starting out, who had great potential, maybe was ambitious and aggressive and really at it, and yet was frustrated because they weren't having the kind of success that they thought they should have, right? And then that shift in focus is really what makes the difference.